All right. Welcome, everybody. We have a special webinar today, an info session about the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowships for New Americans. But today, our specific focus is going to be on applicants in STEM fields. And we have other webinars that are available online. You can find them through our website. Some are sort of general about things like eligibility or just the general background of what the fellowships are all about. And then we're trying to create a series of these info sessions that are really focused on different areas of study in the hopes that some of the insights from the fellows who are here today can help you create a really strong application, but really thinking through what that application would look like from sort of a similar field to you. So we have three fellows on. I'm going to have them introduce themselves in just a moment. So today, what we'll be doing is we'll meet the fellows who are joining us. We'll let you know what makes a strong application, and we'll be talking through that with the fellows, and then we'll leave some time for questions. My colleague Yamilet is on with us today. And if you have questions, you can type them into the chat box, and she can answer some of them along the way, and some of them we will try to get to at the end when we open up for a Q&A portion of this session. Okay, here we go. So we've got three fellows with us all in STEM fields, and why don't we have them each just introduce themselves, say a little bit about what you're studying, where you're studying, and what, so maybe just a quick like introduction to what you think somebody who's applying should know about you. So Michael, why don't you kick it off?
Sure. Hi, all. Excited to be here. My name is Michael. I am currently studying chemical engineering at Caltech. Um, I'm a first generation immigrant, and I think that will become relevant as we talk about application tips.
Right. Abigail?
Hi everyone, good to meet you. I'm Abigail. I use they, she pronouns. I'm an applied physics PhD student at Harvard. I work on quantum materials, so it's a lot of like chemistry and physics. And I think I'm a 2023 fellow. And yeah, I'm a child of Chinese immigrants who came to the US in pursuit of education. So I think that'll also come up later.
Great. Thank you so much. Juliet?
Ron, really nice to meet you and be here discussing the fellowship with you. I'm a civil engineering PhD candidate at Stanford, and I study natural ventilation and trying to understand how physics can be integrated into design processes to help us deal with sustainability challenges. I'm an immigrant from Nigeria, and like the other said, we'll talk more about that as we talk about the fellowship.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you all for being here. Let's move it on, and we'll talk with you guys a little bit more. So, you're meeting three fellows here today. We have over 800 fellows from over the history of the fellowship in a wide variety of fields. And I'm introducing you to this tool here that's on our website. It's a directory that you can use. It's a searchable directory, and you can look up fellows by the university they are at or were at, the degree they were pursuing, or you could perhaps look at some different areas of interest. But the goal is that if you are looking for fellows in particular areas, this is really a great way to do it, and that will help you perhaps narrow down some of your searches to learn a little bit more about individuals who've won the fellowship, but also some of the focuses they've had that might help you to understand some of the ways you might want to position yourself when you're applying. So let's talk about some of what we are looking for in our fellows. The first thing we always say is we're looking for people who've demonstrated creativity, originality, or initiative. And we're looking for this in any field. We feel like, no matter what field you're in, if you're taking a creative approach to the work you're doing, then that's something that we really value. And if you back it up by initiative, taking action on your ideas, demonstrating that you can really make things happen, these are qualities that we're looking for. So I'm going to turn to our fellows now and ask them some of the ways that they feel like they had demonstrated creativity, originality, or initiative in their own work, and maybe how they express that in the application. So, Juliet, can I start with you? Do you have some ideas about how you demonstrated creativity, originality, or initiative?
Yeah, so I feel like my interest in the built environment is really grounded in my own kind of immigration from Nigeria. And in coming to United States, I was really curious about how, built environments in different places are different and how the current processes that are used to create these environments need to change in order to be kind of like more applicable and create better livelihoods for people all over the world. And so that led me to a series of different things. So first was being a part of Engineers Without Borders in university. And that allowed me to kind of really kind of get my hands dirty when it comes to civil engineering and really understanding what it takes to be with communities and really build infrastructure with them. And then on the other hand, I was working on a thesis that really thought about how you can integrate computational methods and make these work better for communities. And this is exactly what my research focuses on now, and a lot of what I spoke about in the application as well.
Great. All right. Thank you. I'm sure we'll come back to you again to talk about some of these other aspects, but that was a really great introduction to your work and some of the ways that you were creative, especially in the way that you use some of your the influences of your culture and sort of your understanding of the built environment and how that could be improved for the future. I really like that. Michael, how about you? Any thoughts on creativity, originality, and initiative, and how you demonstrated that in your application?
Yeah, I think for starters, I'd say like there's a few parts in the application where you can let this shine, and we'll talk more in detail about the different aspects of the application later. But just generally, for me, creativity was something that it took me a little bit of reflection to really find out how to incorporate in my application. I think maybe it doesn't immediately come through for STEM people, how what you're doing in lab, for instance, is creative. But if you really sit down and think about it, um, I think there is a really natural, connection there where a lot of what we do, and I'll try to keep this general, but I'll also speak to my experience in particular. But a lot of what we do in STEM fields is when we do research in particular is find methods that have either already been developed or maybe we need to develop from scratch, which there's already that taking initiative and using creativity to develop novel approaches to problems. But even if you are just using existing methods to tackle a certain problem, um, that must by default, since it's a new research project, involve some creativity, some originality to take a method, apply it to a new application. And for me personally, that also I went a step further and discussed a little bit or tried to emphasize how I'm using techniques from different parts of science. So for me personally, I studied mathematics and engineering in undergrad. So for my research in grad school, I was looking for how do you sort of bring these fields together? And I feel like in STEM fields in particular, that's often where there's a lot of potential for taking initiative or being original, is finding those, papers from distant fields that if you're hyper focused on one thing, you might have no idea what's going on in another realm of STEM. But really emphasizing that you're capable of bringing different ideas together, seamlessly blending these methods to approach whatever it is the challenge you're tackling is. So those were sort of some of the things I thought about when I was reflecting on, creativity and taking initiative.
Great. Okay, that was fantastic. So let me turn to Abigail, and I'll say because I feel like this creativity, originality, initiative is so central to who we are that I'm going to talk to each of you on this one. I may, for some of the future questions, I might just get one or two of you to respond, but I feel like this is really central. So let me hear Abigail's response to how you incorporated ideas of creativity, originality, and initiative into your application.
Sure, yeah. I guess since folks have already talked about how sort of their STEM and research work has played into this question, maybe I'll talk a little bit about how other things outside of exactly what, your career and your academic careers may be focused on for me played into this. So I guess one half of I know this is a STEM session, but one half of I think my identity that was really core for me in undergrad and pulling through grad school is this desire to connect the humanities and sciences. I actually double majored in history in undergrad, and something I was really thinking a lot about as I was applying to this and applying to my PhD in applied physics was this history of science and the context behind the work that we do. So I think for me a really important part of I guess initiative and originality that I held in my identity was thinking about why I was doing the science I was doing in a more broader context and why I wanted to for me be in academia, but really draw upon fields beyond just STEM to inform sort of the path I took forward, both in my career and personally. So I talked a little bit about that, I think, in the application. And then the other aspect is also, I think broadly, folks are very interested in understanding you holistically, like applicants holistically as a person. So what are you doing outside of, your career and classes and research, that kind of thing? So I think in terms of demonstrating initiative and other aspects like that, really talking about my experience in student leadership positions or student government, that sort of thing, or also community advocacy and doing outreach and engagement with the community beyond my university was really important and something that has held true throughout my education as well. So for me, I think like those aspects, of course, I focused and really tried to explain and contextualize my science in a way that was very understandable to a broader audience. But I think it's also important to think about the other ways in which you're, complex and engaging with things that you believe are important to your identity or your work, like as a scientist or just as a person. And those are, I think, the things I really focused on in my like creativity, originality aspect.
Right, was a really wonderful answer, and I really appreciate your underscoring that, you know, uh, many, most of our fellows, all of our, I don't know, are not one-dimensional, and that there are different aspects to your personalities. And while it is important to be excelling in your field and in your specific area at a very high level, but the fact that you're doing other things and have other interests and want to merge different kinds of interests is also, can be very valuable for the world and for you and for the fellowship. So that was a great and helpful answer. Let me turn to the next two sets, the next two criteria here, and that would be sustained accomplishment and the promise of future significant contributions to society or culture or your field. And I share these together for a reason. So for sustained accomplishment, we're looking for people who have achieved at a high level for a number of years. We are looking for people who hold the promise of making future significant contributions to society. At the same rate, we can't always tell what that contribution is going to be. And so we're very interested in hearing about the way you're going to improve the world we live in. I think that's an important thing for you to be able to express. But we also understand that plans change and what you may talk about may not be exactly what you're doing in the future. So what we're looking for are people who have the accomplishment at the time they've applied that would demonstrate that they can make that contribution in the future, whatever that contribution ends up being. So let me turn back to Juliet and ask you about any thoughts you had on how you demonstrated sustained accomplishment up till the time you applied, you know, or what did you talk about that your contribution to society would be in the future?
Okay. I think a really key way of thinking about this, or how I thought about it when I was writing the application, was just really trying to pull the different threads of all the different things I'm interested in together into like a cohesive whole. that also underscores what I'm interested in and why I want to kind of do it in grad school and also do it in the future. So for me, I kind of talked about a little bit my experience with Engineers Without Borders, but then my interest in kind of computational design. And I spoke about how I had been a leader in this group for like my entire time in college and really stuck with it through the time I was in college, but also how my interest in computation kind of was also sustained and is going to be sustained and is exactly what I'm doing inside my PhD. So I feel like, you know, really highlighting that thread and making it clear that this is something I'm genuinely interested in, not just a passing interest, was something I focused on in my essay. And then in terms of future contributions, I spoke a lot about how the work that I'm doing in my PhD is something that I hope to continue afterwards, even though I'm not necessarily planning to stay in academia. I highlighted how I'm already kind of trying to build partnerships that would allow me to kind of seamlessly transition into the goals that I have in the future. So in that sense, just trying to make it very clear that I already have plans to pursue this and explaining what those plans are and making sure that those things are something that is understandable to someone who's not in my field.
Great answers, super thoughtful. I really appreciate that. Okay, I think I'm just going to turn to one more person for this answer, and then I'll move on to a different question. So let me ask you, Michael. Can you talk a little bit about sustained accomplishment or promise of future contributions?
Yeah, I really like Juliet's answer. A lot of that really resonated with me. I think one of the sort of challenges I've had in my academic career was the fact that I'm just interested in so many different things. So I briefly mentioned in my research, like bringing together different fields, which seems to be a theme among some of our fellows. But um, that was a challenge at first when I was starting to put together this application because it's like, how do you cohesively put together this story when you've done so many different things, or maybe you've bounced around research interests, and that was the case for me. So what was really important was finding kind of the underlying theme between all of my interests that really brought everything together. So for me, that was sustainability. So even though I've worked on several different research projects that at first glance might not really have any immediate connection. I really focused on that sustainability theme throughout the application. And that really helped me kind of merge all of these things together into a cohesive story. And I think we'll talk about later the essays. One of the challenges, for instance, of the essays is they have a pretty strict and short word limit. So when you are approaching actually, writing about your accomplishments, say it's in your essays, I think one really important thing to think about is how to be really concise. Um, and again, targeting a broader audience. So for me, that was like with each accomplishment that I wanted to talk about, it would be, what was sort of the challenge I was facing in this period of my research? How did I approach it? What were my hypotheses and what were the outcomes? And that outcomes part is really important because if you kind of just forget about that and just write about, here was the research idea that we were working on and don't really illustrate like what the actual outcome of the project was, then this like sustained accomplishment sort of gets lost. And in there, it doesn't have to be like, oh, this was a super successful research project. I have this like first author publication. It doesn't have to be anything like that. It can just be, here's what we learned about the research topic. It could even be like some of those intangible skills, like, oh, I made a bunch of presentations in this period of my research career, and that really taught me how to be an effective communicator, like those sorts of things. Maybe there was a mentorship opportunity that came as part of the project. All of those can sort of fit into the sustained accomplishment. And similar to how Julia kind of illustrated, like when it comes to talking about promise of future contributions, again, for me, it was this theme of sustainability, and I really wanted to continue that focus beyond grad school. So when I was telling the story about, sustained accomplishment, that kind of naturally segued into this discussion of here's how I'm going to take everything that I've learned from all these different research projects, and how I'm going to utilize these skills towards my future goals, which again stay in this realm of sustainability for me. So I actually think these two tie in naturally very well. And as long as you're able to tell that story effectively and find those underlying themes that tie in all of your accomplishments together, then the transition to talking about future contributions should be pretty seamless.
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much. Great answer. Okay, I'm going to, well, first, let me quickly move on to the next criteria, which is planned graduate training that's relevant to your future goals. I bring this one up, which is, I think, a little bit straightforward. So I don't think I'll spend time discussing this one, but let me turn to one that I think that people have more of a challenge with, and that's commitment to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Now, let me just say, in general, I don't hear people talking directly about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Like I don't see essays that say, I believe in the Bill of Rights because, most people don't reference these documents directly, but it's more of a lived commitment to the values of democracy. People really understanding what it means to live in a democratic society, valuing what being in the United States means and has to offer. It can be a commitment to community, people who support their communities, their home community, their community of academics, but there's different ways that people demonstrate like the values of citizenship, being a good citizen. Not, I don't mean a US citizen, but a good citizen in any community in which you reside. I'm going to ask, I'm going to do this a little differently. I'm going to ask Abigail to come in on this one, and then Juliet. And I'm doing it this way because I'm going to very quickly grab a set of headphones because there's some background noise here. So let me start out, and if you're done, hopefully I'll be back in 1 second, but it might take me another second. So if I'm not, then Juliet can chime right in after Abigail's done. Sound good? Okay.
Perfect. Yeah, I guess I certainly, like Craig was saying, I did not like explicitly mention the Constitution or Bill of Rights in my application. I think what I sort of surmised broadly from what the application was asking is how do you engage in your community, and also, whether that means through like civil service, volunteering, a commitment to like building community, whether that means like being in leadership positions for like clubs or something like that. I think that's really what this kind of request is looking for is not about like necessarily anything that's like I love the Constitution, right? I think also it's worth mentioning like at some point, and especially in the essay, we'll get to this later, but about the New American sort of like essay, it's worth thinking about like what is like the term New American mean to you, and like what does that have to do with America, right? Like what does that have to do with, the place that you live in and how we engage with politics and like civil society more broadly. And so I do think those themes came up in what I was writing about in terms of, like understanding the political landscape and how that maybe engages with your work, which I think is very relevant for STEM right now. I probably don't have to say more about that. But even beyond that, just like personally, whether maybe you're like applying for citizenship or something like that, like how does that affect your life, both as a scientist or just personally? So yeah, I'll pass it on to Julia.
All right, thank you, Abigail. I think for this question, just like Abigail said, I did not, like list out the 10 parts of the Bill of Rights, and it's like, this is why I believe this. But an important part of my research is making sure that communities are engaged in, or at least have a say in the environments that they live in. And so I feel like this translated really clearly to this commitment to democracy and making sure that, or not making sure, but just making it possible for people who are traditionally not represented in the built environments to actually be represented and have channels to have that say. And it also kind of like links into my research and trying to make physics-based tools more accessible to people who typically don't understand that. And I think especially as a scientist, like communication is so important because, a lot of people look at engineering or science and are like, oh, this is not for me. But explaining how I try to make sure that my work can be communicated in such a way and making it clear that this is a priority for my research, I think helped to communicate this interest in democracy and kind of making these things that seem like they should be locked away in an ivory tower more accessible to all. So just to summarize, in order to address this question, I just really linked it into how I already do that in my research. So you can take that approach as well.
Great. Okay. Sorry that I only got to hear one of those answers, but that was a really beautiful answer. Okay, let's move on to some other aspects of the application process. I'm going to share a little bit of information here, and that is that our selection process is merit-based. So we are looking for high-achieving individuals who are all working at a very high level. We're not financial need-based. You should know that. Some of our fellows need the money very much to attend graduate school, but there are fellows who might be on a university stipend or have other sources of financial support. And if you're working at a high level, we're enthusiastic about you regardless of your financial need. There's no quotas. We don't have particular numbers that we're looking for in any field, of any heritage, of any school. We do our best to holistically review applications. And what we mean by that is that we're looking for your strengths in the application wherever they lie. For some people, that might be in different ways that how you achieved in school. For other people, that might be your research is really strong. For others, that might be a creative way you demonstrated leadership. But you'll tell us about your strengths, and that's what we're going to focus on. We value the concept of distance traveled. Some of our fellows have traveled a great distance in their lives, not physically, but in terms of where they started and where they came to. And that, while not all of our fellows have traveled that great distance, we often think of that as being important and relevant, because somebody who has traveled a great distance to get to, let's say, maybe the first person in their family to ever attend or graduate from college, and now they're in a graduate program doing very well. We say, well, look how far this person's come. They probably have a very long distance that they're going to travel further, and that's very exciting for us. Back to that idea of holistic review process, we don't have GPA or test score requirements. If that is a strength of yours, then we will certainly pay attention to that, but you may have other strengths in your application. And because of that, we don't have particular expectations for GPAs or test scores. We are nonpartisan 501c3. All of our applications are reviewed after the deadline. And what I mean by that is we don't do rolling admissions. So when the applications come in, we wait until our late October deadline. Once they're all in, we then review them all. And you are welcome to apply more than once. Many of our fellows were people who applied once. They didn't win the fellowship. They didn't get invited in for an interview. Subsequently, sorry, I'm getting over a cold. Subsequently, they did become a finalist, came in for an interview, and won the fellowship. So you can apply more than once. So let's now turn to the actual application, and that's really going to be, I think, a place where you want to hear from the fellows, since you're probably contemplating the application process itself right now. You can go online to pdsoros.org and you can start an application. They're all due October 30th. 2 p.m. Eastern time. Don't be late. Don't get it in on the 30th. Give it a couple days. Get it on the 28th, the 27th, just to make sure you don't have any issues. And our application starts with a series of questions. They're sort of demographic questions, pretty straightforward, about your education, about, where you were born, birth date, things like that. We then ask you to upload a resume or CV. Now, I am most familiar with like 2-page resumes, but it could be that in STEM fields you have a lot of research that it goes longer. Some people do a CV format if they've done a lot of poster presentations and talks and taught classes, but the 2-pager often works. I'll just do the quick question here. Juliet, what did you remember if you had what kind of resume you had? Did you have a shorter 2-page resume or did you have a longer document?
I had a shorter document.
Okay, Michael?
I had like a 3-ish page CV.
Okay. Abigail?
I think mine was 1.5 or 2. So
Okay. So don't feel that you need to create a super long document to be, really impressive, like a shorter document really summarizing your key accomplishments, your key, research experiences, educational background. That will clearly suffice. We are going to ask you for all of your college and graduate school transcripts. Any school that you were matriculated at, we want the transcript from, and unofficial copies are okay for now. Um, uh, I talked a moment ago that we don't have any requirements for specific test scores. At the same rate, if your school required tests, then we require them. So if you had to do a GRE for your graduate program, then we're going to want those, the GRE scores as well, for instance. And now let's get into the meat of the application. The two essays are central to our to this application because we really get to find out a lot about you in these essays. And I would sort of loosely label the first one the New American essay, because we ask you what it means to be a new American, how it shaped your worldview, how it's shaped your overall goals. And the second essay I would call the graduate school essay. It asks you about why this graduate program makes sense and how it's going to help you achieve your future goals. Now, I will say that we have addressed these essays in other places, and we actually have some help guides online that you can read that talk about how other people have how fellows have gone about writing these. But let's take the time now to learn a little bit about how these folks here crafted their essays. So this New American essay, Abigail, how did you get started? What was your entry point for it? Did you talk to people? Did you sit down and do some free writing? Had you already written an essay about your New American background? Like what was the way that you got things going so you were able to sort of move forward to the next level?
Yeah, I would say this is the hardest part of the application, I think for me and probably many others, because I'd never written any essay that was similar to this before. So I think to get started, I will say that I did not like finish writing or even begin like doing actual writing until maybe like a month before it was due or like weeks before it was due because I spent so much time thinking and just like brainstorming. So I think for me, I really tried to deeply think about what experiences of my own were both unique to myself and also very unique to the experience of being a new American. So I think some of this involved talking to my parents. I don't know if this is true. I think of like friends that I have who are also like children of immigrants, but often you don't even know your parents' stories until like you're, I don't know, like 20 something years old, or they like aren't super like open in telling you. And so I think trying to like ask them a little bit about, for me as a child of immigrants, like about their time coming to the US, and particularly because they came here for education, and this is, a fellowship intended for graduate education. That's something I was really curious to think about because so much of my I guess like personal goals tied in being a PhD student and also just goals broadly and wanting to be a professor and in academia are tied to education. So a lot of brainstorming was just talking to my parents and like thinking about how their experiences have influenced mine. A lot of it was also just thinking about how this value, like for me, a through line, this value of education has influenced my various steps throughout undergrad and in applying to grad school. What is motivating me, not just scientifically, but what are sort of the politics that are motivating me in wanting to be in academia? Like, why do I care about, making STEM education accessible? Why do I care about like geopolitics and how that affects different scientific fields, especially in physics, and thinking about like US-China geopolitics? So I think those are themes that were relevant for me just to brainstorm, and I've probably spent like 90% of my time just brainstorming and like notes apping, like anything that came to mind that was like, oh, this is like something about me, this is like something about my interests, and this is something specific to my story that nobody else can sort of repeat. Um, so I think I know it's a little bit vague, but hopefully that gives people an idea that like you don't have to, know your story a priori. I think some folks have a very clear sort of linear story, especially I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think, often people write about like their immigration experience, and that's not something I had personal experience with. And so for me, it was more about reflecting on, I guess, the sense of purpose and why I was even pursuing graduate school in the first place. Um, yeah, I would say that, the writing can come, everyone is a different writer, but for me, the writing really came at the end, after a lot of this reflection and just like thinking about it for myself.
Great. That was a really, really thoughtful answer. And I think that's something that not everybody understands, that, you don't have to have this preformed, perfect new American story at the moment you start an application. That's something that we hope the process will open up for you. Whether you win the fellowship or whether you don't win the fellowship, we actually hope that that's a big benefit of applying to the fellowship, is that you have the opportunity to really deeply interrogate your own experience and think deeply about what it means for you to be a new American in a way that you very likely would not have had the opportunity to do otherwise. Michael, how about you? How did you get started on that new American essay?
Yeah, I think honestly, I'm gonna echo a lot of what Abby said. For me, and this is like the number one piece of advice I would give people for this essay, I started pretty darn early, maybe like 3 months in advance of the deadline at least. But when I say I started early, that doesn't mean that I was immediately like sitting down and writing. Because kind of like Abby went through, I had to reflect and think a lot about what I actually wanted to include in this essay. And yeah, as a first gen immigrant as well, that involved a lot of conversations with family. Um, and it involved just sort of a lot of reflection on some of the things that I had been through as a first gen immigrant, and being careful to toe that line of like privacy. I guess making sure that folks in my family would be comfortable with some of the things that I wanted to write about. So that was also part of those conversations I had with family. But it was really important to me to start early without even writing anything, because from there I was sort of able to remember, recall stories, things that happened to me, maybe things that I heard that happened to my family. I remember kind of like walking to class on one day and thinking of a story I wanted to include, and just writing it in my notes app. Sort of like Abby mentioned, I also had a notes app, just keeping track of all the things I wanted to include. And then when it actually came to writing the essay, it didn't come naturally for me, at least. I mean, it's a difficult essay to write. And my essay went through like at least three pretty significant stages of revisions and edits. So that's where like that extra time that I allotted myself by starting early came in really beneficial. And from like the content of the essay as a first gen immigrant, I wanted to obviously talk about my family story, but also spend a little bit more time discussing how some of those things affected me. And one of the questions I kept asking myself is like, if I wasn't a first gen immigrant, would I still be here today? Like, would I be attending this, grad school program? Would I be studying these things that I'm interested in? And for almost all of those types of questions, the answer for me was no. And then it was just a process of figuring out, exactly why that was. Um, why did, certain things that my parents went through affect what I eventually ended up studying, right? That's not like an immediate connection that was very easy for me to make. That's why that stage of reflection was really important for me. And since this is a STEM session, I don't think I honestly wrote that much about STEM during this first essay. I certainly touched on like why I'm studying the things I am, in like, a brief paragraph talking about like how my grandparents influenced some of those decisions. But this was one of those places in the essay or in the application that I alluded to earlier, where you can really let your creativity shine. It doesn't have to be entirely focused on STEM. You'll have a whole nother essay to talk about all those accomplishments. So yeah, you can feel free to be more creative. Talk about some of those other interests beyond just STEM. How did those influence what you ended up studying, and the why you ended up where you are today? So there's a lot to think about here. And yeah, I would highly recommend starting early. Just read the prompt and start thinking about it early, and have conversations with family as much as you can.
Great. Okay. So you got some really super thoughtful insights onto that essay one. Let me turn to Juliet to talk about essay two. So some people tell me that essay two for them looked very similar to their graduate school essay. some people, what you applied to, how you applied to graduate school, you used a lot of that essay. Some people tell me they started from scratch, but probably not as many. And some people have told me recently, I've heard this, that it was similar to a grad school essay, but they were able to talk about how they wanted to change the world in a way that they probably wouldn't have in a more concrete kind of um, grad school application essay. So, which, if any of those approaches, did you take, Juliet, or none of the above? And how did you go about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I resonate most with the third option, where it's a little bit like a grad school essay, but you do have more flexibility to just explain things and really talk about your motivations as to like why personally you're interested and invested in this research. And I think that can only add to your essay by explaining like, why you want this research to be successful and why you will work hard in order to make this possible. So I know in my like the first part of the second essay, I really linked it to what I had spoken about in the first essay, where I talked a lot about my background and moving around a lot as a kid and how that directly influenced my interest in urbanism and the built environment, just seeing different built environments in different places. But then unlike I don't think this is something that, people who are admitting you to grad school would be as interested as this fellowship. So I really just appreciated the opportunity to talk more about that because that is something that is really important to me. And then going back to something that we spoke about earlier in terms of like what you want to do in the future, I also felt like the essay was an opportunity to really elaborate on what I wanted to do after grad school and how the work that I'm doing in grad school now is setting up for that, and really go into detail about these kind of future plans that, your advisor might be more interested in the research that you're actually going to do in grad school. But I really appreciated the ability and the opportunity to really, kind of split that into three, talking about my motivations, what exactly I'm interested in, and what I want to do in the future in greater detail.
All right, great. Super, super helpful, very thoughtful. Let me ask you a slightly different question, Abigail. Did you think at all about, so let me back up a step. We tell people that generalists are going to be reading your application. At some point, specialists may read your application. So somebody in your field may be reviewing your application, but in general, in the first several rounds, especially, we're going to have generalists who don't necessarily know your field in depth. Did that concern you at all, or did you think about that in approaching essay number two? Like, how detailed do you get? What happens if a specialist does read it? You want to make sure they know what you're talking about. But, at the same rate, if generalists are reading it and you're in the weeds the whole time into really technical stuff, they may not appreciate it. So how did you navigate that, that divide?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in part I kind of relied on recommendation letters to also help me with that, but I can I'll circle back to it. So um, I was definitely writing, I think, more towards a generalist audience because I think the work I do in physics is relatively, I don't say niche, but like relatively specific. Since I work on quantum materials, like a lot of physicists also don't necessarily like engage in that field and understand what it particularly means. So I think the approach I took was first framing quantum materials, like what is a quantum material? Like what does that even mean? And going at it from a very generalist point of view. And then I made it a little bit more specialized by talking about here are the particular techniques and here are the particular systems that I'm really interested in. And some of that maybe was a little bit more jargon, but broadly I talked about, here's a sort of scientific collaboration and interdisciplinary thinking that goes into this particular field. And then I drew it back out and went more general and said like, okay, I just told you, some of these technical details, but like broadly, what is the importance of quantum materials in the field of physics and in like our general technological development and scientific development, like as a society. So I think I tried to like, I forget, like funnel and then like go wider basically. But I will say I did also ask my letter writer recommenders to help me contextualize that a little bit more as well. So I asked, I had recommenders who are like research advisors from undergrad and also my current graduate advisor, which I think helped a lot because I asked them like, hey, can you talk just a little bit about like the work that like we broadly do in this community and how it's relevant, because that way I think, if there's generalists who still are not really understanding like the broad strokes of the picture, which hopefully I made very clear, they can also refer to, like faculty who they spend their time really advertising their work and applying for grants, and speaking to audiences who are exactly maybe like the folks who are reading the application. So I think you should take most of the responsibility. At least I try to take most of the responsibility in like explaining, but also made sure it got reinforced somewhere else in case it didn't like totally come through.
Great life advice there. Use your recommenders to help support your application, but even your field or even your department. Like why can you help explain why this is a really, a super strong field within this department can be helpful, or can you advocate for the field itself so people understand? So that's great, and it also just shows that it's okay to talk to your recommenders and let them know what you need. But as you said, you also explained yourself, what does this whole field even mean? Great job. Okay, let's turn to optional exhibits. Now, this is an area where you can include up to 5 additional documents or materials that can enhance your application. I would say in general, there's 2 approaches people take. They either go deep or they go wide. So with deep, people will include some examples of the research. Maybe they helped co-author a paper or did some kind of a lit review, or maybe they even won an award in their field. And those are the kind of things that go deep into showing your who you are in your field. Going wide might be showing some other aspect of your personality. Perhaps you are going into law, but you also write beautiful poetry, and you wanted to include some of that poetry because you think it shows the breadth of who you are as a person. So those are the ways I usually see that. Let's go really quickly. I'm just going to go through all of you super quickly and tell me like what you included, like how many you included, and roughly what they were, but don't go into depth. So let me start with Juliet.
2 things that I definitely remember including were this profile that had been done of me by the Center for African Studies at my school that talked about my contributions there. And then also I included some research I've done.
Great. Michael.
Yeah, I definitely went wide. I think I submitted 5. A couple of them were just examples of writing, so like papers I'd written. And I mentioned like having been interested in a lot of different research topics. I felt like this was where I wanted to give evidence that I actually was able to go pretty deep in these topics. I wasn't just saying that I was interested in a lot of different things. I also included like a recording to kind of show it was a video I put together for like a 3-minute thesis competition. So that's also usually um, targeted towards a broader audience and also gives a sense of like how I am as a communicator. And then completely unrelated to STEM, I submitted some of my recordings playing piano because that was another aspect of my application talking about music. So
Great. Okay, you don't have to like dig up some artistic thing because, I mentioned it, or because Michael happens to play piano at an extremely high level, so he wanted to include that. But I don't see that from everybody. It's not like everybody who's going into a STEM field has some, very deep, profound, artistic endeavor. But if you have it, then you very well may want to include something. Abigail, how about you?
I don't remember the exact number I submitted, but I will say I applied in my first year of graduate school, so I hadn't had any like graduate papers yet. I did submit like co-authored papers from undergrad. I think there was one. I think I submitted both my history like senior thesis as well as like my STEM senior thesis. Then I might have submitted like some like I don't know if it was a news article or some sort of like journalistic piece about like advocacy work I had done. So it was very like broad and went the wide route.
All right, great. Okay, let me, again, we're going to do a speed version of this one. You can submit, well, you have to submit 3 letters of recommendation, but you can submit up to 5. I would say on average, 4 is what I see. And that doesn't mean everybody submits 4. I'm just saying some people submit 3 and they win. Some people submit 5 and they win. Some people submit 4. On average, it's 4. Abigail, how many? Do you remember how many recommendations?
I think it was 4.
Okay, Michael.
I also had 4.
Juliet.
I also have 4.
Okay, there you go. On average, it's 4, but these were all right on 4. Here's what I will say. 3 strong recommendations is way better than 3 strong recommendations and 1 weak recommendation. Like, go with your strong recommenders, whatever number that is, but don't feel a need to fill that out just, because like you think it looks better. People win with 3 all the time. What makes a strong application? A self-reflective new American story, a clear articulation of your future goals. And again, we're not going to hold you to it. We know people's lives change, but somebody who has vision and can articulate it, that's exciting for us. Strong recommenders who can speak to your impact, evidence of leadership, creativity, persistence, and excellence, a track record of challenging yourself, and a commitment to contributing to U.S. culture and society. Okay, let's now, I'll let you look at these for a minute. Because I'd like to turn to questions. And so I'll just kind of keep that slide up for a minute. And you're welcome to ask in the chat any questions for our fellows here, or if it seems better for me to answer, I'm happy to jump in as well. So Yami, what do we have?
So someone asked, how would the award be distributed if one is already on NSF GRFP?
Yeah, we do our best to work with other awards and maximize your payout for each of the different awards. I could not go into the details because it's actually a bit complicated, and Julian from our team works with you and your other funders and your university to try to come up with a plan, and they're all sort of personalized. There's not a cookie cutter approach, although certain things seem to work well with, certain fellowships. So there are some general best practices we have, but I couldn't give you the details right here.
Someone else asked, if we include something about an artistic hobby, does it have to be referenced in the application somewhere tying into their story?
What do you think, Michael?
I can tell you that I definitely did weave it into my story, but I wouldn't force that to be the case. Like, I wouldn't say that you have to do that. For me, music just happened to be a really important part of my sort of new American experience, and that was a way for me to connect, with my family on a deeper level, and also it was a sort of mode of communication for me during times when I had some issues communicating otherwise with folks around me. So for me, it was like 100%. There's no doubt that I wanted to write about music. But yeah, like I said at the beginning, don't force it. If it does tie into your new American experience in a genuine way, then I would say include it. But it doesn't have to be included.
Sounds like a good answer to me.
Someone else asked, how did you choose your letters of recommendations? What aspects of your character did you ask them to highlight other than the relevance of your work?
Let's do Abigail for this one.
Sure. I think the main ask that was distinct from like a regular graduate school application was honestly like being more vulnerable with your letter writers, which was not something I was used to, especially with professors. But just telling them a little bit about like why I was applying to this, and even I gave them like a snippet or like a draft of my New American essay and sort of contextualize like this is why I feel very passionately not only about like like science in my particular field, but broadly like attending grad school and being a leader in whatever field you end up wanting to be a leader in or like engage in. So I asked them to highlight a little bit more, not necessarily my personal story, because the readers are going to read that anyways, but just like my drive to do something and how that was reflected in maybe the way I pursued research or pursued like other extracurricular things in addition to research. So I made it clear there's some advisors that I was like closer to and like they knew a lot about what I did outside of my, like STEM work, and asked them to like, just comment on it and say like, express their thoughts, but say like, oh, I've been engaged in a lot of other things beyond just my research, and this is how it makes me like a holistic sort of not only candidate, but just person in general. And I asked them to speak a little bit, less about like, oh, they did well in like these classes or whatever, because this is not the graduate school application, but rather about like I guess just your goals. So I do think like being vulnerable with them and asking them to speak to your goals is useful and how that's reflected in what they know about you.
All right, you guys just got some fantastic advice on letters there. There's a lot there that you should take with you. One of the takeaways to me is that it's okay to have conversations with your letter writers. Another is that you should share with them so they really know who you are and what your motivations are. And that combination, should end up hopefully helping you to get a really well-rounded group of letters, not unidimensional letters that just show you from one side, but that your recommenders understand you in a three-dimensional way, and you have helped guide them to let them know what you're looking for in those letters. What else do we have, Yami? Any other questions?
Yes. Another question was, how did the fellows go through the editing phase? Did they use their families or other people?
Juliet, why don't you let us know what you did?
Yeah, for this, like that quarter when I was applying, I was actually taking some sort of like a writing tutorial. And so it was nice to have someone who had already been reading my writing go over the essays that I was writing because they were already kind of familiar with my style and what I like to come through in my writing. So I don't think that's necessarily something that everyone can do, but I think the general thing you can take away from that is everyone who reads your essay is going to have a different opinion, but getting advice from someone who already understands your style of writing can be helpful in kind of making sure that they're giving you advice that pushes the essay in the direction that you kind of envision it going.
Great. Let me, by a show of thumbs up, who of you showed your essays to other people for feedback? Okay, good. So that is a sign that we're okay with that. Your work needs to be your own. It needs to be your original work, but we are all about your showing essays to a close friend who's a good writer, a writing tutor, someone in the fellowship office, a faculty mentor. These are some of the places you can turn for support to have somebody read your essays and give you feedback and let you know if they think you're on the right wavelength. Let's do one more question.
Okay, so we have a few questions regarding letters of recommendation. So, one, how did you choose your recommenders? Two, were all your recommenders professors, or did you also pick mentors? And were these individuals only from your graduate school or from other experiences as well?
Michael, why don't you do that one real quick?
Yeah, really quick. In terms of how to select letter writers, honestly, like stick to the advice that Craig said earlier. What I was really trying to avoid was that like really generic letter of recommendation, um, which is, you might as well just not submit a letter like that. So I was really thinking about people that know me on a personal level that I've worked with for a decent amount of time on various projects. And the one thing I'll add to that is I think it's really helpful to reach out early to these people, offer to chat with them, maybe get a coffee with them. If you're comfortable, you can share your application materials with them. And then, yeah, I'll defer back to a lot of what Abigail was saying about, things you can tell them or ask them to focus on. And so I included two professors from Caltech. So I'd been at Caltech for a year, one professor that I worked with during undergrad, and then one non-academia person entirely, someone I worked with, or I guess he was like my boss during like an internship I did during undergrad. So I don't know that that would really count as a mentor, but someone that could speak to my ability to engage in non-academic work as well.
Fantastic. Okay, that was great. I'm going to end it with that one because I think you gave a really well-rounded answer. And you guys, everybody who's on this today, I hope you've appreciated the advice you've gotten. Juliet, Michael, Abigail, absolutely, superb, really thoughtful answers. You certainly have underscored to me why we selected you as fellows, and it definitely gave everybody some really great advice on how to craft strong applications, particularly in STEM fields. So thank you for being with us today. And Yami, thank you for helping run this, and we're going to sign off now. Thanks, everybody.